The wagon was still rocking when the door came off its hinges. Mercy Ainsworth pressed her back to the split-log wall and shoved the 3 children behind her skirts in one motion, her palm flat and steady against the youngest's chest so he wouldn't cry out. The lantern on the table guttered from the draft. Outside, boots ground into the frozen mud of the yard, and a voice she had learned to hate in 6 short months called her name the way a man calls a dog he means to whip. "Mercy, come on out here now. Bank don't wait, and neither do I." She did not come out. She looked instead at the children, and the look she gave them was the look a woman gives when she has already done the arithmetic and found the answer unbearable. Ellis was 8, all elbows and stubborn jaw, holding his sisters the way his father used to hold the reins in a storm. Junie was 6, silent since the funeral. And the baby, Tomlin, not yet 2, blinked up at his mother with the trust of something that had never yet been failed. Mercy had been failed, twice by God, in her private count, and once by paperwork. "You in there, widow?" The voice belonged to Ord Vesey, and Ord Vesey did not knock. He had bought the note on the Ainsworth homestead the week after Thomas had been laid in the ground, and he had ridden out here every Sunday since, watching her from the road like a man watching a chicken get thinner. Now the frost was on the fence posts, and the note was due, and Ord Vesey had brought 2 men and a piece of paper folded 3 times in his coat pocket. Mercy stepped through the broken door before he could break more of it. "I hear you, Mr. Vesey." He was smiling. He was always smiling. That was the thing about him. The smile never touched anything else on his face. "You had until sundown yesterday. It's morning. Sun's already on the barn. I've got the money coming," she said, and her voice did not shake, because she had practiced it not shaking for 2 nights straight. "Feed store owes me for the eggs. The Millers have a calf they said they'd trade." "Eggs?" Vesey looked at his men, and one of them laughed like he'd been paid to. "You hear that, Coy? She's going to pay her dead husband's debt in eggs." Behind her, in the cabin, the baby began to cry. She heard Ellis shush him. That low, patient sound of a boy who had grown too old too fast. And something inside her that had been holding for 6 months finally gave way. Not visibly. She did not weep. But her knees remembered they were only knees. "Take the children," she said. Vesey blinked. It was the first honest expression his face had made all morning. "Say again. Take them to town. To the mission. To the marshals. They've asked after Junie before." Her voice was flat as pounded tin. "Take the children, Mr. Vesey. Not me. I'll go with you to sign whatever you want signed. I'll work the debt. I'll do whatever a woman does when she has nothing left. But not them. They don't belong in it." For half a heartbeat, Ord Vesey looked at her as if she'd offered him something interesting. Then his smile came back on, slow and greased, and he opened his mouth to answer. He never got to. "All of you now." The voice came from the road, low and unhurried, the kind of voice that did not have to be raised because it had never once in its life needed to be. Mercy turned her head. So did Vesey. So did the 2 men with him. A rider had come up while they were talking, and none of them had heard him. He sat a tall roan the color of wet river stone, his coat brown canvas gone pale at the seams, a rifle across the saddle in front of him, not raised, not lowered, only present. His hat shaded most of his face. What showed of it was weathered and quiet. He was looking, not at Vesey, but at Mercy, and he said it again, gently, the way a man corrects a child who has miscounted. "All of you now. You keep your children, ma'am. Whatever the man wants settled, he settles with me." Ord Vesey turned his whole body toward the rider like a door swinging on a rusty pin. "And who in the hell might you be?" The stranger did not answer that. He swung down off the roan slow enough that no one could call it a challenge, and slow enough that everyone knew it was one. "Name's Wickham Boone," he said, to Mercy, not to Vesey. "Your husband wrote me a letter last spring. Took its time finding me. I only got here Tuesday." Mercy's hand, which had been holding the doorframe, slipped off it entirely. Thomas had never mentioned a Wickham Boone. They stood in the yard the way a photograph stands, stopped, arranged, no one moving because no one knew yet which way the shutter would fall. Vesey's 2 men had their hands too near their belts. The stranger had not touched his rifle. The children watched through the broken door. "Letter don't mean nothing to a bank note," Vesey said finally. He was recovering himself. His smile was crawling back. "You her cousin? Brother? You her fancy man." "I'm a friend of her husband's," Boone said. "Which makes me a friend of hers." Friend won't pay $240 by noon. How much by noon? 240. Boone reached, without hurry, into the inside of his coat. He did not pull out a gun. He pulled out a leather pouch, worn soft, and he weighed it once in his palm, and he tossed it. Underhand, easy, so it landed in the frozen dirt 3 feet from Vessie's boots. Counted in front of witnesses, Boone said. I'll want the note back, signed clear, and I'll want it signed to her. Not to me. To Mrs. Ainsworth. In her own name. Vessie stared at the pouch like it was a snake. Pick it up, Mr. Vessie, Mercy said, and her voice had come back to her from wherever it had gone. Pick it up and go. He picked it up. He counted it there in the yard, twice, with his men peering over his shoulder, and when he was done his face had gone the color of skimmed milk. He fumbled the folded paper out of his coat, and he signed it on the flat of his saddle, and Boone watched him without a word until the ink was dry enough to hand over. Then Boone took the note, walked it to Mercy, and set it in her hand as carefully as if he were handing her a living thing. Yours, he said. Free of him. Vessie mounted. He tried, one last time, to gather his dignity around him like a coat that no longer fit. You'll regret riding into another man's business, Boone, whoever you are. I've regretted worse, Boone said, mild as milk. Ride on. They rode on. When the last hoofbeat had rounded the bend, Mercy discovered she was holding the paper so tight her knuckles had gone white, and that her whole body was shaking in a way it had not permitted itself to shake in front of or Vessie. Wickham Boone did not look at her while it happened. He looked at the barn, and the busted door, and the split rail down by the west fence, and he gave her the courtesy of a private minute. When she could speak, she said, You'll want to come in out of the cold. He said, I'd be obliged. Now, if you're listening to this one while the coffee's on, or while the light's still coming up over your own kitchen window, let me ask you something before we go further. What would you have done, in Mercy's place, standing in that doorway? Would you have said what she said? I think a lot of us like to imagine we'd be brave. But bravery, when it comes, doesn't always come the way we pictured. Sometimes it comes as the smallest, saddest offer a mother can make. Keep listening, because this story isn't done yet, and neither is she. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and old bread. Boone took his hat off at the door, a small thing, but Mercy noticed, and he did not sit until she asked him to. Ellis stood in front of his sisters like a fence post nobody had told him he could stop being. Junie's eyes tracked the stranger the way she tracked Hawk's, silent, unblinking, careful. Only the baby was unafraid, and only because he did not yet know what fear was worth. Your husband, Boone said. Once he'd taken the coffee she poured him with hands that had almost stopped shaking, was the best man I ever rode with. Mercy sat down across from him. You rode with Thomas? Before he met you. Before he was Thomas Ainsworth of the Good Farm and the Good Wife. When he was just Tom. He turned the cup in his hands. Down in the nations, and after. He pulled me out of a mess in '78 that I had no business surviving. Wrote me every Christmas for 11 years. Last spring the letter was different. Said he was sick. Said if the sickness took him and left you here alone, he'd count it a kindness if I rode up and looked in on things. He never told me. He wouldn't have. Wasn't his way to ask. Boone looked into the fire. The letter took the long way finding me. I was in Oregon, then Nevada. It caught up to me in a stage office in Cheyenne 2 weeks ago, and I came as fast as a man can come. Mercy pressed her palms flat on the table so they would stop trembling. The money was mine to give. I've got no wife, no children, no debt of my own. I've been saving 30 years for something, and I didn't know what, and now I do. He set the cup down. I'm not asking anything of you, ma'am. I don't want the farm. I don't want a place at your table past today. I only came to keep a promise. If you'd rather I ride on, I'll ride on tonight. Where would you ride to? Doesn't matter much. She looked at him then, really looked. He was maybe 50, maybe a hard-lived 45. There was gray at his temples and a scar under his left ear the shape of a fishhook. His eyes were the tired, patient blue of a sky that had seen a great deal of weather and stopped commenting on it. He was not handsome. He was something better than handsome. He was steady. Ellis, who had been holding his silence like a held breath, finally spoke. You knew our pa? I did, son. What was he like? Before. Boone considered the boy. He did not condescend. He did not soften. He was fast on his feet and slow to anger, and the only man I ever met who could sing a horse to standing still. I imagine you've got some of that in you. Ellis's chin trembled once and steadied. He nodded like a man accepting a wage. Stay the night, Mercy said. At least, the barn's still sound. There's hay. We can talk about the rest in the morning. That'll do fine, ma'am. He rose to go out to the barn, and at the door he turned. Mrs. Ainsworth, whatever you decide come morning, that note in your hand is yours. Nobody takes it back. Nobody takes this place from you or those children. Not while I'm above ground. He closed the door softly behind him. Mercy sat at the table a long while after, and she did not cry, because crying was a thing she had trained out of herself in front of the children. But her hands, at last, permitted themselves to rest. Winter came in earnest that week. Wickham Boone did not ask to stay past the first morning, and Mercy did not ask him to. He simply, without announcement, mended the door before breakfast. Then the split rail. Then the barn latch. He asked her permission before every task, and he took his meals on the porch until she told him, on the fourth day, that a grown man eating in the cold when there was a table indoors was foolishness, and she wouldn't have it. He moved to the table. He said grace before eating, brief and unshowy. Junie, who had not spoken a full sentence to a stranger in months, asked him on the sixth night whether his horse had a name, and he said, Roan doesn't need one. He knows who he is. Junie considered this and appeared to find it satisfactory. Ellis followed him everywhere, silent as a shadow, and Boone let himself be followed without comment. He taught the boy how to sharpen an axe properly, how to check a hoof for stone bruise, how to tie a knot that held underweight and came loose under a pull. He never once said the word father, and neither did the boy, and the absence of the word was heavier and truer than the word would have been. The baby, Tomlin, took to riding on Boone's shoulder while Boone worked, gnawing on a wooden spoon and observing the world from a height he approved of. Mercy watched all of this from the kitchen window and did not know what to do with what she was watching. She had loved Thomas. She loved him still, in the quiet, permanent way a person loves the dead. What was happening in her kitchen now was not that, and she did not yet have a name for what it was. It was gentler than that, or perhaps it was simply older. She had married Thomas at 19, in a hurry of feeling. She was 31 now, and the feeling that was rising in her had nothing to do with hurry. The trouble was that Vesey had not gone quietly. He came back on the second Tuesday, and he came with a lawyer. Not a real one. Cheyenne's a long ride, and Vesey wasn't paying real lawyer money, but a man in a suit who called himself one, and a folded document, and a story. The story was this, that Thomas Ainsworth, in his last days, had signed a second note against the homestead, one Vesey had neglected to mention on his first visit. That the 240 was only the first piece. That there was another 380 owed, due at the end of the month, with the same land as collateral. He produced the paper. It had Thomas's signature on it. Mercy looked at the signature a long time. Then she said, quietly, My husband was blind in his right eye for the last 4 months of his life, Mr. Vesey. He signed nothing that whole time without me guiding his hand. I would remember guiding it to this. The lawyer coughed. Vesey's smile flickered. You calling my paper false, Mrs. Ainsworth? I'm calling it a lie, Mr. Vesey. In front of witnesses. Boone stepped out of the barn then, wiping his hands on a rag. He did not hurry. He walked up, and he stood beside Mercy on the porch, not in front of her, and he read the paper over her shoulder without touching it. Signature's a fair copy, Boone said mildly. Whoever did it studied a real one. But the date's wrong. Vesey's jaw moved. July 18th, Boone said. Thomas Ainsworth was in Fort Collins that day. I know because he wrote me from there. The letter's in my saddlebag. Post office stamp on it, and everything. He looked up, and for the first time since Mercy had known him, there was something hard in his eyes. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and older than anger. You picked a bad day, Mr. Vesey. Any other date on that page, and you might have got away with it. The lawyer, who was not a lawyer, went the color of paper. You forged a dead man's signature, Boone continued, still mildly, in front of his widow and 3 children. There's a federal marshal rides through Sweetgrass every other Thursday. I believe tomorrow is Thursday. Vesey stood very still. Boone said, you can tear that paper up right now, on this porch, and you can ride out of this county tonight, and you can never speak Mrs. Ainsworth's name again in any room I hear about. Your choice, sir, but you make it before you get back on that horse. Vesey tore the paper up. He tore it slowly, and with hate. and small pieces of it caught the wind and blew across the yard like snow that had gotten the season wrong. The lawyer was already mounting. Vesey looked at Mercy one last time, and whatever he had planned to say, he swallowed. "Right on, Mr. Vesey," Mercy said. It was the second time she'd told him that. It came easier the second time. He rode on. They stood on the porch a long minute after, listening to the horses grow small. "You knew," Mercy said, "about the date. Before you read it. I knew he was in Fort Collins. I didn't know the paper was going to say July 18th. That was luck." Boone folded the rag into a neat square. "Some things are luck, ma'am. Most things aren't. Today was luck." "Was it luck the letter took 8 months to find you?" He considered. "No, I don't think that was luck either. I think that was Thomas." She looked at him. He was looking at the sky, the way men do when they don't want to be looked at too closely. "Mr. Boone," she said. Wickham, I don't know what I'm asking you, but I'm asking you not to ride on. Not this spring. Not for a while yet." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'll stay as long as I'm useful," he said, "and I'll stop as soon as I'm not. That's the only bargain I know how to make." "That's a poor bargain." "It's an honest one." "Then take a better one." She turned to face him full. Her voice was steady. Her hands, this time, were steady too. "Stay as long as you're wanted, which will be longer than you think." He looked at her then, properly, for the first time since he'd ridden up on that first cold morning. And whatever passed between them in that look was not spoken aloud, because it did not need to be. He nodded once. Then he went back to the barn, because there was still work to do before dark, and work was how a man like Wickham Boone said the things a man like Wickham Boone did not know how to say. They were married in the spring, at the little chapel in Sweetgrass, with the 3 children standing up beside them and half the county in the pews. Nobody said the word stepfather. Ellis, who was 9 by then, walked his mother down the short aisle himself, and when the preacher asked who gave this woman, the boy said, "I do, sir," clear as a bell, and there wasn't a dry eye in the second row. Ord Vesey did not attend. Ord Vesey, it turned out, had left the county the night of the torn paper, and had been arrested in Laramie 4 months later for forging a different signature on a different note against a different widow. And the marshal who arrested him mentioned in passing that a rancher up in Sweetgrass had sent a very polite letter suggesting Laramie might want to look at Mr. Vesey's paperwork carefully. The rancher had signed it Wickham Boone. The homestead prospered, in the modest way homesteads prosper, not rich, never rich, but fed, warm, and paid. Ellis grew tall and grew into his father's slow hands and his mother's quick eyes. Junie found her voice again by degrees, and eventually could not be made to stop using it, which suited everyone. Tomlin, who had been the baby, grew up believing without ever being told that his father was a quiet man on a roan horse who had come out of the winter road one morning because he'd been sent. Years later, when Mercy was asked by a young bride at a church supper what the secret was, the young bride meaning marriage, meaning love, Mercy set down her coffee cup and thought about it honestly. "A man owns a piece of land," she said, "by putting his name on it. But he keeps it by tending it. Same with people. Same with everything worth keeping." The young bride wrote it down on the back of a hymnal card, and Mercy laughed at her, gently, and told her to go dance with her husband instead. Wickham Boone lived to see all 3 children married. He was buried, when his time came, under the cottonwood at the west fence line, in ground he had mended himself the first week he ever set foot on the place. Mercy visited him there every Sunday morning until she couldn't, and then Ellis visited for her, and then Ellis's son after that. The cabin's still standing. The door still swings true on the hinges he set. If you go up that road today, past Sweetgrass, past the fork by the creek, you'll see it, a low, sound, honest house, with a porch that faces east to catch the morning, and a fence that has never once, in all the years since, needed replacing. If this one warmed you, friend, sit with it a minute before you go. Stories like Mercy's happen more often than the world lets on. The quiet rescues, the promises kept the long way around, the strangers who turn out not to be strangers at all. Wherever you're listening from tonight, I'd love to know. Tell me in the comments. And stay close. There's more coming.